Welcome to Jazz Piano Daily. This is number 94, and today I'm going to share with you 3 secrets that I use or I keep in my head while I am improvising over jazz standards. Okay, so let's dive right in. The first one is utilizing chord tones. All right, chord tones are really the bread and butter of your improvisation in that it gives you all of those big building blocks. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it today. That's going to be tomorrow's lesson. Today, I want to give you these concepts so that you could try working on them before tomorrow's lesson. All right, so chord tones. So what does that mean? That means if I were to put on my iReal Pro track here, right, and then you can see my progression right up there. Now, I'm going to be utilizing my chord tones of each chord that I'm playing of the moment. So when I go to F major, I'm playing chord tones from an F major 7th. When I go to E minor 7, I'm playing my E minor 7 chord tones. When I go to A7, I'm playing my A7 chord tones. Now, if you don't know those chords, then you have to go back to the early part of the Jazz Piano Daily and take a look at some of those more basic lessons on chords. So you really get down those major chords, minor chords, dominant chords. You really want to make sure that you know those chords. Now, how to test if you really know your chords and know the chord tones, just try playing a single note down there and see if you could weave in and out of your chord tones. Right, so you should be able to play something. You don't have to play it that fast, but you should be able to. You should be able to arpeggiate those chords and be able to weave a line. If you're not there yet, don't worry about it. It's totally fine. You can get there. How you get there is working through each of those chords. Just simply start with, okay, E minor 7/5. A7, and when you do these chords, do the different inversions. Okay? All right, so chord tones, that's the first one. Next one, scales. So if we think of chord tones as being the boulders, scales is like the sand that fills in between. So you have chord tones, those are the boulders, sand fills in between the chord tones. Gives you a little bit more of a sophisticated sound. Let's take a listen to it along with our backing track. So you can hear, like, when you can fill in with those scale tones, that it sounds a little bit more sophisticated, right? But not really, right? The chord tones really sound good. And a lot of musicians that I know that play professionally, they stick with chord tones. That's like, their go-to. And then use scales here and there. All right, so scales is number 2. What scales do you use? There's a whole myriad of scales that you can use, and I suggest that at this point, don't get mired in all of those different scales. The first scale you should definitely make sure that you master is master the major scale. So if you're playing Georgia in the key of F major, make sure you know how to play the F major scale. Right? All right, let's do the last one here, which is chromaticism, or the chromatic scale. Chromatic scale is every note, right? Now, silly me, when I was a young player, my mentors would say, use the chromatic scale more. And I'd be like, oh, okay, so I just go. And I'm like, yeah, well, no, that doesn't really make sense, right? Because it was never really explained to me, how do you use the chromatic scale? Well, yes, you can go up and down like that with the chromatic scale, and you can, hit your different chord tones and fill in between with that chromatic scale. That sounds really nice. But the other secret of the chromatic scale is utilizing it as part of an enclosure, right? So early on in Jazz Piano Daily, I talked about enclosures, right? And that whole bebop sound. Well, let's say I want to get to my A. So if I do a double chromatic from below, double chromatic from above, and get to A, you can see that that's not chord tones, that's not a specific scale, this is chromaticism. So let's take a listen to what it sounds like as I add in more chromaticism. right? So you could hear that the chromaticism really adds this other layer of sophistication to the sound as well. It's almost like it's almost like our ears start at chord tones, and as they start to develop more, then we add on scales, and as they start to develop more, then we start to add in more chromaticism, all right? So anyway, think about those concepts. Now, there's no sheet music per se for today's lesson, but if you remember Jazz Piano Daily, I made this handy-dandy sheet here that you can go ahead and download and then print off and have it at your piano. So that when you're practicing, you could say, okay, let me focus on chord tones, let me focus on scales, or let me focus on the chromatic scale, right? And bringing each of those elements into your playing. Like I said, in tomorrow's lesson, I will be showing you more nuts and bolts of what this actually looks like. Until then, I'll see you. To get the first 45 pages of music for free, just go back to jazzpianodaily.com. If you liked the video, please be sure to click the like button and also subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. To watch the rest of the lessons in this series, just click on the playlist to the right of this arrow. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.